Welcome to the deep dive.
Oh, this is a good one.
It is. This time, you guys have sent us a ton of stuff on fantasy author Brandon Sanderson, Reddit threads, articles, YouTube videos. It's a lot.
Sounds like we're going deep.
Yeah, we're diving into the whole debate around Sanderson's faith, his inclusion of LGBTQ plus characters in his books, the whole thing.
Right. And that's been sparking some pretty heated reactions, hasn't it? From fans and even other authors.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not just about whether or not there are LGBTQ plus characters in Sanderson's books. I don't know, it feels bigger than that.
Totally. It's like, can an author's personal beliefs evolve without, totally alienating their fans? Especially when it's about something as, sensitive as this.
Exactly. So to really understand what's going on here, I think we need to go back in time a bit.
Time travel. My favorite.
Back in 2007, Sanderson wrote an essay where he basically said that, homosexual attraction is something that should be resisted. He was citing his Mormon faith as the basis for that.
Yeah, that 2007 essay is definitely at the root of a lot of this discussion. But then, fast forward to 2023, and Sanderson makes a public statement declaring his unequivocal support for LGBTQ plus rights. And we're talking everything: gay marriage, trans rights.
Big change, right?
Huge. He even started donating to LGBTQ plus organizations. So people are, they're talking.
Understatement of the year.
Yeah.
And the fans are, let's just say they have opinions. Some of them are really excited about the inclusion of LGBTQ plus characters. They say it feels really natural and fits into Sanderson's storylines.
Yeah, I've seen that too. But there's definitely another side to this.
Oh, yeah. You've got people pushing back hard. They're worried about a woke agenda, stuff like that.
Okay, let's unpack that woke thing, because honestly, it's everywhere in the stuff you sent. It seems like people are using that word to mean that Sanderson's changing his stories to please some kind of, liberal audience, maybe even sacrificing good storytelling to do it.
Right, he's more worried about checking boxes than writing a good story. I did see some of that.
Yeah, and then you've got fans who are saying that the romantic relationships feel forced, out of place, like it's hurting the quality of the books. Then there's this other layer, which honestly I found really interesting.
Lay it on me.
So some of those YouTube videos you sent were claiming that Sanderson's basically caving to pressure from the publishing industry. They're saying publishers are demanding more inclusive content.
Wow, okay.
And some fans are buying into that theory, especially with the last Stormlight Archive book, Wind and Truth. They're saying it's all connected.
So we've got people saying the representation feels fake, and then you mentioned some specific criticisms about certain characters from that Reddit thread. What's going on there?
Well, some fans are really dissecting the portrayal of Shallan, Jasna, Renarin, and Relin from Sanderson's Stormlight Archive, and questioning if their representation is somehow tied to Sanderson's personal beliefs.
Okay, examples.
So you've got Shallan. She has these multiple personalities, right? And people are debating whether that's supposed to be about gender identity or just trauma from her past.
Interesting.
And then there's Jasna. She's not interested in romance, and so fans are speculating if she's maybe asexual or aromantic.
That ties into the whole point of this deep dive, right? Can an author separate their personal beliefs from their art?
Yeah.
Is it even fair to judge a fictional world based on the author's, real life views?
It's a tough question. It gets even harder when you factor in other authors. We came across this guy, Brad Torgerson. He's a Mormon sci-fi writer.
Okay.
And he's really not happy with Sanderson. He basically says that Sanderson has forsaken his religion and is carrying water for the wokes.
Ouch.
Yeah. He even compares Sanderson to another Mormon artist, this guy, Kurt Bastor, who Torgerson believes lost his unique voice after moving away from his faith. Harsh.
So how does Sanderson respond to all this?
Well, he addresses it head on. In 2023, he writes a whole blog post explaining his reasons for including LGBTQ plus characters. He talks about representation, empathy, how he thinks it's just the right thing to do.
Okay.
And get this, he includes an image of a stained glass window with a same-sex couple on it.
Whoa, he's not backing down.
Nope. And in that same blog post, he compares representing religion to representing LGBTQ plus identities. He brings up this book, Rose of the Prophet, by Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss.
Oh, I've heard of that one.
He argues that they portrayed a gay character really well, even though their personal beliefs might have been different at the time. It's an interesting comparison, right?
Definitely. It makes you think about whether an author needs to personally identify with a group to write about them in a way that feels real.
Right. It's a lot to think about.
A lot. But, we've talked about the fans who think the representation feels forced. Let's talk about the other side, the ones who say his writing's gotten worse because of this.
Okay, so what's interesting there is that some fans are like, hey, I respect Sanderson's beliefs, but his books aren't as good anymore. They're saying the focus on representing different identities is like taking away from the world building, the characters, the plots, the stuff that made us love his books in the first place.
Wow, so they think it's directly affecting the quality.
Yeah, and some of those YouTube videos specifically call out Wind and Truth again, saying it went from this amazing series to, well, not so amazing.
Okay, but do they have any, proof, or are they just speculating?
It's more like they're pointing out timing coincidences. So remember that huge crowdfunding campaign Sanderson had?
Oh, yeah, that was massive.
Well, his whole public stance change happened right after that.
Okay.
And then he starts collaborating with authors like Mary Robinette Kowal and his editor, Moshe Feder, both known for being, well, pretty vocal about diversity and inclusion.
Okay, that's interesting timing.
Right. So whether or not there's something to it, people are definitely talking.
Makes sense. I mean, this is clearly hitting a nerve for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And it really makes you think, can you enjoy a book if you know the author believes things you totally disagree with?
Yeah, can you separate the art from the artist? Big question.
Big questions indeed. And that's just the beginning. It's like they're saying he's selling out just to, please everybody. But how much should we really buy into these theories? Is there any real proof?
Well, that's the thing, right? An accusation isn't the same as evidence. Those YouTube videos don't actually give any solid proof that Sanderson's doing this on purpose, to pander.
Right. But they do make you think, is it even possible to completely separate an author's personal beliefs from the stuff they create? And should readers even try?
It's tough. It's almost like we're judging the art based on who the artist is, rather than what the art actually is.
Yeah. But hold on, let's go back to Shalon for a second. You mentioned earlier how some people think her multiple personalities could be a metaphor for gender identity.
Right.
That's a really good example of how people can interpret things so differently. Some fans see her struggles as just being about her past, all the trauma she went through, but others are connecting it to gender identity and maybe even to Sanderson's newer support for trans people.
It's crazy how the same story can mean different things to different people.
Yeah.
But I remember Sanderson actually talked about this in his blog post. He said, authorial intent, like what the author meant, doesn't always match up with how readers interpret things.
Oh, that's right. And he used that example, Rose of the Prophet, by Hickman and Weiss. He said they wrote a gay character really well, even if their beliefs were different back then. Almost like a book can take on a life of its own.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't get too hung up on trying to figure out the real meaning behind everything. Maybe it's more about how the story makes us feel.
I like that. But then, doesn't that also open things up for, misinterpretations?
Yeah.
Especially with something as, sensitive as gender identity.
True. I mean, we do need to be careful.
Yeah. And I think it highlights how important it is to just talk about these things. Be open about representation. It's not enough to just include diverse characters. It's about doing it in a way that feels real and respectful.
Totally. Authors have to do their research, listen to different voices, be willing to learn. That's a lot.
It is. But let's switch gears for a minute. We talked about the people who are really critical of Sanderson, but there's also this group of fans who think his work actually reflects his faith, even if it's not in the way some people might expect.
Okay, explain that one to me.
So, while some people are saying he's abandoned his faith, others are saying they see his Mormon beliefs woven into his stories, particularly with themes like redemption, personal growth, overcoming darkness, all that stuff.
That is interesting.
It's a much more subtle way of looking at the connection between faith and writing,
So instead of seeing it as him, betraying his faith, they see it as him exploring it.
Exactly. Maybe he's not trying to preach or anything, but just using his stories to, grapple with his own beliefs. It's definitely a different take.
Totally. Can you give me an example, though? How does this actually play out in his books?
Okay, so think about Dalinar Kholin in Stormlight Archive. He's a character carrying a ton of guilt from his past, right? And he goes through this huge spiritual transformation.
Oh, yeah, Dalinar's intent.
Right. So some fans are connecting this to the Mormon emphasis on repentance, on striving to be better.
I see.
It's maybe Sanderson's exploring these themes not to convert anyone, but just to figure stuff out for himself.
That's a personal journey reflected in his work.
Right. But it also brings up that question again. Can an author really control how their work is received? Can they stop their own beliefs from bleeding into the characters and themes?
It feels almost impossible. I mean, no matter what the author intends, readers will always bring their own stuff to the story,
True. But I'm curious, do any of the sources we looked at talk about how Sanderson sees this tension between his faith and his writing? What's his take on it all?
That's a good question. I don't think he's ever directly addressed it, specifically. But he has said over and over that his main goal is to tell good stories, not to promote any specific belief system.
Okay, so he sees himself more as an entertainer than like a preacher.
Right. But does that mean he's like actively avoiding letting his faith influence his writing? Or is it more of a subconscious thing? Like it just seeps in because it's part of who he is?
Tough one. It's impossible to know for sure, right? Unless we could like read his mind.
Maybe someday.
Yeah.
But I guess it's possible he keeps his faith and his writing separate. Or maybe he edits out things that feel too preachy.
Yeah. Or maybe his faith is just so ingrained in him that it shapes everything he sees, whether he realizes it or not.
That's a good point. It's like trying to separate, the artist from the art. Is it even possible to completely untangle those threads?
Especially when it's something as personal as faith.
Exactly. But you know what? I think we can all agree that Sanderson's faith, whether he means it to or not, adds something to his work.
Oh, totally. It adds a layer of depth, of complexity that you don't always find.
It's like this hidden dimension some readers pick up on, while others don't even notice it. But it's part of what makes his work so, Sanderson. And it's probably part of why people have such strong feelings about it, both positive and negative. It sparks debates. It makes you question things. It forces you to confront your own beliefs about storytelling,
Absolutely. And that's a good thing. Art should make us think, make us feel, and maybe even push us a little outside our comfort zones.
So well said. But let's shift gears for a sec. There's another side to this whole Sanderson thing that we haven't really dug into yet.
Oh, lay it on me. What else is there?
Well, remember how some people are saying Sanderson's writing has gotten worse?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. Are they right?
It's true. He was already super successful before all of this. I mean, his books were always on the bestseller lists. He had tons of fans. It's not like he was some nobody, you know?
Exactly. He didn't just magically become popular after making these changes.
Right.
So maybe it's more about him growing as an author, trying new things and wanting to reach more people, but without abandoning his values.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, it could be. But let's address those specific criticisms about Wind and Truth. Some people really didn't like that romance between the two guys, and then there's that transgender character. Some people felt like that was just thrown in there.
Yeah, like he was just trying to check off a box.
Exactly. Authors have to be really careful about that kind of thing. It can't feel like you're just using those characters as tokens. Representation has to feel real. It has to be part of the story, not just something you add on at the last minute.
Right. It can't just be about saying, look, I have a diverse cast. It has to actually be diverse in a way that feels genuine.
Totally. But this brings us back to that big question we keep coming back to. Can an author really change their beliefs and still keep their fans happy? Because in Sanderson's case, it's like we're watching this whole thing unfold in real time, and people are definitely not holding back their opinions.
It's messy, right?
Super messy. There's no easy answer. I think authors need to be honest with themselves. They need to be willing to talk to people, and they have to think about how their work affects their readers. But at the end of the day, I think it boils down to this. Are they telling a good story?
You're so right. I mean, all the representation in the world doesn't matter if the story itself is boring or doesn't make sense.
Exactly. The story has to work on its own. It has to be engaging, it has to make you think, and it has to be well written. If it's not, then all the good intentions in the world won't make it a good book.
Okay, that makes total sense. But I think it's important to remember that this whole thing with Sanderson, it's not happening in a vacuum. It's part of a much bigger conversation that's going on right now.
Oh, for sure. Things are changing so fast. And there are all these conversations about social justice, identity, representation. It's everywhere.
Exactly. And it's like Sanderson, with all his fans and his willingness to dive into these complicated issues, he's right in the middle of it all.
He's definitely not shying away from it, that's for sure. And that comes with a lot of power, but also a lot of pressure. I mean, he has the ability to really influence how people think, to change the conversation.
Yeah, to use his stories to make the world a better place.
Exactly. But, being that visible also means people are going to be watching him, judging him. He can't make everyone happy.
I guess that's the price of fame. Or maybe the price of tackling tough topics. But, at least he's trying. He's not ignoring it.
I think that's important. He's engaging with these difficult issues, even if he doesn't always get it right.
True enough. But at the end of the day, it's up to each reader to decide what they think, to decide if they like his books, if they want to keep reading them.
Right. Because reading is such a personal experience. What one person might find offensive, another person might find really moving.
That's so true. And that's why these conversations are important. They force us to look at things from different angles, to question our own beliefs, and to realize that there's not always a simple answer.
Well said. Okay, ready for that final question I mentioned?
Hit me.
So think about everything we've talked about today. Sanderson, his changing beliefs, how the fans are reacting, the whole challenge of representing different people in a way that feels authentic. Does all that, an author's personal life, their choices, their beliefs, does it affect how you experience their work?
Whoa, that's deep. It makes you stop and think about all the books you've read, the authors you love. Can you really just ignore who the author is and just focus on the story? Or does knowing about them, good or bad, change how you see everything?
It's something to think about. Maybe it'll change how you experience the next book you pick up.
Maybe it will. Well, that's a wrap on this deep dive into the world of Brandon Sanderson. We talked about a lot today, and I hope it's given you all something to think about. Until next time, keep reading, keep those brains working, and most importantly, keep talking about this stuff.